Hello and welcome to The Wire. I'm Sravasti Dasgupta. Lawyer and activist Sudha Bharadwaj was released from Mumbai's Byculla prison on December 9th, 2021, over 3 years after she was arrested over what the Pune Police claimed was her connection with the Elgar Parishad case. Bharadwaj was among the 16 activists, scholars, and lawyers arrested in the case, which has been decried as having been a witch hunt against lawful dissenters. Today, Sudha Bharadwaj is joining us with her new book titled From Phansi Yard, My Year with the Women of Yerawada. Welcome to The Wire, Sudha Bharadwaj. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
I want to mention to our viewers at this point that Ms. Bharadwaj's bail conditions do not allow her to speak about the case, so our conversation will not delve into that in any way, and we will be focusing mostly about her book and her experiences as she writes in her new book. To give our viewers a sense of what the book is about, it details her year in Pune's Yerawada Central Jail, where she spent a year in the Phansi Yard, which is usually for death row prisoners. Here she details her life with the women lodged in the jail as she observed them through her prison cell. Without taking any names of these women, she constructs their lives of about 76 women as she observes them through her time in jail, and she weaves these stories of these women and their children, even their pets, and reflecting on everything around jail life, including the caste hierarchies as well as the fist fights, some friendships, and most importantly, the absence of legal aid for the most defenseless women. My first question to you, ma'am, is how did you come up with the idea of this book, about writing it, and how did you go about writing it while you were incarcerated?
Well, actually, I never really very consciously thought of writing it. I think it was my way of coping with being in prison. Uh, I mean, people have different ways of coping with prison life. It's a difficult life, and so a lot of people take to religion, they pray, and some of them, just look after others, make friends. There are so many different ways I saw women around me coping with jail life. My way of coping was just to look at these women, observe these women, and it was a very spontaneous thing. Actually, I never thought about that it would ever be published, but I just started writing about these women because I think one thing that I realized, I mean, after you get over the initial shock of being in prison and the initial indignity of being in prison, and it's a tough life, so the toughness of it. But then I also began realizing, I mean, definitely how very much more privileged I was than most of the women around me. Most of them were very poor. A large number of them were uneducated. In the Yerawada prison, of course, there were a lot of convicts as well, not just under trials. And particularly in the compound which we were there, a large number of them were convicts. So, and many of them were abandoned by their families. They didn't have good lawyers. They didn't know what was happening in court. So, I think I got a real sense of things which I knew about. I knew as a lawyer and as a trade unionist and as a human rights lawyer that things are pretty bad. But yeah, I got a very close view of it. And then I started delving into how these women ended up here, landed up here. So just I would just like looking at some of them and thinking what it was like to be in their shoes, and then so that's how the writing happened. Actually, at that time, I never really thought that it would become a book. Some of my friends encouraged me after I came out, and I typed the notes, and well, yes, it has come out as a book now.
An important theme in your book, which I have had the privilege to read, is the caste hierarchies in prison life. While there's a power structure in terms of officials and inmates, there's a very definite interplay of caste in how prison life functions among the prisoners that you observe in this book. And that is in various ways, whether it is how work is distributed and certain kinds of work that is reserved for the lower caste, their large numbers in terms of their presence, the punishments that are eventually in the form of sentences perhaps that are handed out to them. So how did you see this whole caste hierarchy playing out?
Well, I'll just give you one example because that is a community which I think, in the case of whom the caste discrimination was most apparent, that was the Pardhis, or the denotified, so-called denotified tribes. Now, Pardhi people are, even today, because you, you see simultaneously as the decriminalization happened, the Criminal Tribes Act was repealed by the Parliament. In the same breath, almost, the Habitual Offenders Act was enacted in the very same session of Parliament, in the very same debate of Parliament. It has to be read to be believed. So basically, whenever there is any petty crime that happens in in jurisdiction of any police station, the most natural thing for the police is to go up and pick these people up as suspects, and of course beat them, and any kind of theft, any kind of robbery, and it becomes such a and it doesn't need any proof, it doesn't need any, it's just suspicion on the basis of their background and birth. And when they used to come into the jail, often they would be very I mean they would also sort of group together, and they would kind of be and land up being segregated from the others. They would, eat together, and in a form of self-defense, they would also be very, cohesive as a group, and also be very belligerent about their rights and so on, which probably they very much needed to do. But yeah, so that was a group which it was very visible. Um, in the so-called kundewalis, they were called the kundewalis. That is the women who do the clean sanitation work of the jail. They were not only Dalits; they were also again denotified tribe people. They were also OBCs. And though in terms of monetary payment, actually they were the only ones who, I mean, they got at least the highest wage, actually 1800 rupees, of which many of them would send a lot of it home. But they were definitely, the bottom ladder, and asked to do all kinds of things, whether it's, a dead cat has to be picked up and put somewhere, or the, leaves have to be brushed off the top of the barracks, of the tiled roof of the barracks, or anything that needs, drains have to be unchoked, bathrooms have to be cleaned, and they're at the beck and call all the time. So I've written a few stories of these women as well. Yeah, so basically jail is a microcosm. Whatever you have outside, you have inside.
You speak about the fact that whatever is outside, an expression of that is, of course, inside the prison as well. But an interesting departure from this that you also note in your book is the idea of the secular character of prison life, where you speak about the various celebrations of religious festivals of all faiths, whether it is Eid, ahead of Ramzan, officials, inmates, everybody gets together, Christmas, Easter, and of course the Hindu festivals. And interestingly, you write that while divisions may exist outside the prison walls, inside the prison it remained quite a secular order. Did this come as a surprise to you in any way?
Well, in a certain way, yes. Actually, if you look at it, it's not very surprising, because the minorities are not a minority in the jail. There are too many of them arrested, so they are a very substantial figure in the jails. So so a lot of people would observe Rosa. A lot of Hindu women would observe Rosa. A lot of them started, chanting Hallelujah, and with the Bible, and so all that. And I think the prisoners had a very pragmatic philosophy. We Bhagwan koi bhi ho, let's praise them all and hope to get out. The sad part of that was that it was obvious that they couldn't really imagine any, let us say, mortal or material help to get out. It was only, left to the Almighty to release them. And that was really the fate of most of them, particularly those coming from poor rural backgrounds. They were just waiting to bide their time, pass their time.
There's an interesting idea that you also touch upon in the book is how these women, though they might be divided in many ways outside the prison and even inside the prison, they were all united with their search for liberty at some point, someday. But the other theme that I want to touch upon is that these lives of women was also intertwined in a way because they were held together by patriarchy, because it is a book on the lives of women, and you have noted in your book about how many of these women have landed up in jail due to crimes of their husbands, boyfriends, or even
Exactly.
their sons, and they have been unwilling to blame them, even though they know that they are in fact in jail because of them. So how do you see this whole play of patriarchy in the internalization of punishment itself?
Yes, exactly. I mean, if you leave aside, let us say, the cases of drug trafficking, or the cases of prostitution, or the cases of, where they were uh, crimes in a way women were professionally indulging into. But almost all other crimes were really crimes of passion, or crimes that happened in the household. Sometimes they killed their husbands because, and very abusive husbands, or virtually in self defense. Sometimes they killed their family members because they wanted to run away with their lover. And then, of course, the large number of mother in law, daughter in law, the deaths of daughter-in-laws would make mother-in-laws come into jail, and sometimes entire families. But a few things that I saw, I mean, really how patriarchy works. One thing was that a lot of the women were really hostage. They were like legal hostages, actually, hostages by the court for the crimes of their husbands, as you rightly said. So the husband would be the husband, or the son, or the lover would be a gangster, say, and it would be the wife who is picked up, or the girlfriend who is picked up, or the mother who is picked up, and there she is in jail. So many of them would not even know anything about them. I remember the case of one prisoner whose daughter was a very sweet little girl, 4 or 5 years old. She had come in when her daughter was very, very small. She was in a Makoka case. Makoka is the Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime. And I mean, she absolutely had no clue of what her husband was doing. And one day she was just picked up and brought to a thana and introduced to three other ladies, and told, your husband has made all these his wives. These are his wives in different cities. It was the first she had heard of it. She can you imagine the shock that she's going through? Here she is with this little child, and she's told that, oh, he has three more wives, and that he engages in these robberies and so on and so forth. And because they could not catch him, he was absconding. And of course, some of the proceeds of crime were in her name, because he would buy land or other things in her name. So for that reason, she was in jail, and it was not clear how long she was going to be in jail, because she was already there for 4 years. The daughter was 4 years old, and I never saw her go to court, because probably they were waiting to arrest the husband. So these kind of situations. And the other interesting thing was that, even though, I mean, the women's movement has fought a lot for the idea of dowry deaths, and deaths due to torture, which is very difficult to prove. And therefore, if a bride, if a young woman dies within 7 years of a marriage, then that becomes a presumption to under 498A and so on. But even there, what I noticed was, often the women are picked up and the men are not. Now, I can understand everybody being picked up, but the women being picked up and not the men, I mean, is happens in numerous cases. And as you rightly said, sometimes it is the women who are protecting the men. Sometimes they are willing to suffer that, undergo that, because they think, okay, the man is the breadwinner, and so on and so forth, or for whatever reason, I don't know. So that also one saw a lot of.
It's interesting that you're talking about the fact that these problems cannot be solved unless we solve the larger problems in society. And this you touch upon in your book, where you say that one of the major concerns that you noticed during your time in jail was how justice evades those who are poor, impoverished, because of the problems around legal aid system that we have in our country. Do you think
Exactly.
there's a need to relook at the legal aid system as it exists today in our country?
Oh, yes, very much so. I've been, ever since I've come out of jail, I've been writing about it, talking about it. Um, I'm a little happy that there seems to have been some changes in the form of, recently, about a year back or so, a concept of legal aid defense council has been mooted by the Supreme Court Legal Services Authority, but it has yet to reach everywhere. You see, the problem with legal aid is that the legal aid lawyers, first of all, they're very poorly paid, and they don't even have money often to go and visit the jails, to take out photocopies of documents, to make the extra trip, to confer with the client and so on. But the most important thing is they feel that they're accountable to the legal services system, not to the person they're representing, which is the job of the lawyer. So many women had never met their legal aid lawyer. The legal aid lawyer had never bothered to come and talk to them. So all that legal aid lawyer knew was what was written in the charge sheet, which is the police version of the story. So the first and basic thing is you have to come and find out what is the version of the accused. Has the so this sense of helplessness, and for example, many important things may be happening in your life. You might have delivered a baby, you might have lost somebody in the family, you might be mentally unwell or physically unwell. All this has to be conveyed to the legal aid lawyer. The legal aid lawyer needs to put up these things in the court, under whose judicial custody you are. But that never properly happens. We really need to, if we really want to uh, give them a fair trial, we need dedicated lawyers who, and the guidelines must be very strict about their accountability, that at least they should write a postcard, they should write an email, the jail should convey to them what was the order of the court. We talk so much about digitization and all that, but how difficult it is for the prisoner to find out what was the last court order. It's so difficult.
Of course, talking about the need to reform the legal aid system, which of course stems from your own experience in jail. But I also want to talk about your personal experience. Since you, as you mentioned earlier, you have been an activist for so many decades and a lawyer as well. So you have worked closely with people who have been incarcerated in various jails across the country. But as you mentioned earlier, the experience of witnessing it firsthand was quite different. Would you say that your experience as an activist, as a lawyer, prepared you in any way, or that it was the reality was something that was completely something that you could not have imagined?
Well, it did prepare me. In fact, to be very frank, the jails I had visited as an activist, as a lawyer, were much worse than the Yerawada and Byculla jails. I must say, the Yerawada and Byculla jails are probably some of the, I mean, the best they can get. That doesn't mean that they were wonderful, but because they were in the cities of a very developed state, Maharashtra. I've seen what jails in Odisha look like. I've seen what jails in in Bastar look like, or in Sarguja in North Chhattisgarh look like. They're absolutely in far more miserable condition. But yes, the so in a sense I was prepared, but you understand the nitty gritty of it much better. You understand how overcrowding leads to certain things. You understand what the lack of legal aid means. You understand what it means. I mean, how maybe things could be improved by very small, very small measures could improve things. Like, for example, just the water problem. I mean, you have 350 women, and you have water crisis in summer, and you don't even you don't, your municipality doesn't consider that there's a whole lot of women out there, and they just need water. I mean, you know, uh, often if a drain is choked, I mean, it will be merrily left for a couple of weeks. One toilet in a toilet in a barrack being choked means like 50, 60 women are like controlling themselves the whole of the night. It's not a joke. So the little things that that yeah, that is something you only understand when when you're, of course, in Yerwada we were in separate cells, But in Byculla, we were, just in that very overcrowded barrack. So we could appreciate and understand what that means.
In the book, you also write about how, in the beginning, how it all started with an early morning visit from the police when you were home at your house in Faridabad, and subsequently it resulted in your house arrest for 2 months and then your transfer to Pune. Recently, we have seen similar early morning visits from the police to journalists linked with the NewsClick. Some of them were detained. 46 of them were questioned on that same day. And of course, later editor-in-chief and the HR head of NewsClick, Praveer Kulkarsta and Amit Chakraborty, they have been charged with UAPA. So how do you see this increasing use of UAPA in the country, whether it is the Delhi riots cases or now against journalists in NewsClick?
Well, I do feel that dissent of all forms is being criminalized. I mean, whether it is the opposition politicians, whether it is the press, whether it is the human rights defenders, whether it's the lawyers and activists. I mean, uh, uh, the fact checkers. I mean, people like fact checkers. I mean, all we and all these forms of dissent are built into a democracy. I mean, a democracy has to have an opposition. That is the whole concept of a democracy, that you have a satta paksh and you have a vipaksh. Just like in a court, I mean, you have two sides. You can't have a one-sided one one-sided court trial. So but in some strange manner, this even this very legitimate exercise of bringing up the other side, whether it's in the form of research or journalism or activism or protest or what have you, I mean, is being looked upon as a criminal activity, as a terrorist activity, as an anti-national activity. It's extremely unfortunate. It's extremely unfortunate. Doesn't have good tidings for this country. Hearing of this, yes.
And finally, I want to ask you, now that you have seen the legal system from both sides, in a sense, as a lawyer from the inside and as an inmate during your 3 years of incarceration, in your view, how can the criminal justice system be overhauled to make reformation and not punishment the goal?
Well, one thing is, of course, we really seriously have to improve legal aid so that people get fair trials. I think, in a sense, uh, that is one part. The second part is that the magistrates have to take far more seriously the concept of judicial custody. You see, what does judicial custody mean? It means that basically the magistrate should know what is happening to you in prison, and those opportunities are very few. And thirdly, you know as I said, I mean, we really need to improve the reformatory aspect. We need to for example, there are good I mean, in Byculla there was a very good psychiatrist who used to come every week, but inevitably the women who would be referred to her would be only those who are totally out of control and not manageable, who shout or scream or violent, or, so they can't be managed. But those are, maybe a handful of people. Actually, they shouldn't be in the jail at all. But the others, who are VP, who are not having their food, who are, wasting away, actually, those are the ones who need also to be taken care of, because they are probably wondering where they will go. I mean, if they've been abandoned by their families, where will they go? So I think really we need to stress on all these things, and a beginning could also be made if the work they do in jail, I mean, whether it is in the fields or in the factory, if they are paid a slightly more decent amount, maybe they can at least make some savings and take them out. I mean, at the moment it's so paltry, the wages are so paltry, that there's hardly anything that you come out of jail with. So sometimes they just push back into the same old cycle.
Yeah. So that's a very important point that you're making there, that there are various reforms that can be brought in order to overhaul our legal aid system and to make wages and mental health aid that should be made available to inmates in every form in jails. So thank you, Mrs. Bharadwaj, for joining us here at The Wire. We wish you all the very best with your new book.